and welcome back. In this short video I'm going to show a couple of techniques that I use to print on matte papers to get good results. Now, a lot of people say you can't print and get a good black on matte paper, but of course you can. And I'm going to demonstrate these two techniques that I use all the time for printing on matte surface papers, and I'll show you the techniques for both Lightroom and for Photoshop. So let's dive in. So when we're looking at printing on matte surface papers, the first question you need to ask yourself is, why would I want to print on a matte finish paper in the first place? Well, of course, there are many different fine art papers around on the market, some with texture, some with a smooth surface. But the most common reason why you might want to print on a matte surface paper is if you're going to mount it in a frame behind glass and exhibit it either at home or in a gallery. And the last thing you want to do is have the surface of the paper adding to the reflections that are already going to be there from the glass. So most exhibiting photographers I know always print on a matte surface paper, and will demonstrate using a popular type of paper here from both Lightroom and Photoshop. So firstly, let's look at the options of soft proofing and adjusting for print from Lightroom. So when we're looking at soft proofing our images, it's important to remember that the best soft proofing that you can do is still no substitute for making an actual test print on the real paper from your real printer. And the best thing that we can do when we soft proof is to get an idea of how the image will look when printed. So here we are in Lightroom, and I've chosen a few examples here of images that have fairly dark tones, just to emphasize the effect that will happen. So if we're currently in the develop module, if we come down to the bottom panel here and look at the soft proofing button. Now, if in your setup of Lightroom it's not visible, if you find this little drop down arrow on the right hand side here, you see here that you've got some options for different things being displayed in that bottom panel, and you'll see that I've ticked soft proofing. So with that available, we tick that box and immediately we get the image showing on a white background to try and simulate paper. And then what we will do is have a look at the soft proofing using a typical paper that's used for gallery prints, and that is Canson rag photographic, which is a very smooth surface matte finish paper. And I've already got this loaded in here, and of course if you're looking at printing on these papers, you need to download and install the printing profiles for your particular printer before you can actually do this soft proofing. So I've chosen a few here, and from within Lightroom you can go and source these printing profiles that would be installed in your operating system. So I'm looking at Canson rag photographic, and if we just tick this box that says simulate paper and ink, you'll see that instantly the image looks a lot flatter. The blacks have largely disappeared, and so we've got a bit of a problem, but we can at least see a sort of simulation of how it might look when printed. And obviously what we need to do here is our blacks are a problem, and from experience I know that printing on matte finish papers, you do lose a little bit of vibrance in the colors. So we're going to do two things. We're going to adjust the blacks, and we're going to add a little bit of saturation to the image before we print it. But to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a proof copy, so that I'm actually going to work on this from within Lightroom and then print using the proof copy that I create here. I don't actually print from Lightroom, I always print from Photoshop, but if you were printing from Lightroom, this is how you would go about it. So with our proof copy created, you'll see down here in the toolbar, here's the original image, and here's my proof copy. It's showing a little curled up edge, which means it's a simulated copy or a virtual copy, and this is where we're going to make the adjustments for printing. Now, as I said, we've got the proofing turned on, and we'll leave that turned on while we make some adjustments. And in Lightroom it's a little bit trickier to do than in Photoshop, but we can still get pretty much the same results. And what we would do here is we would take our blacks down a fair way, and I've experimented with this, and I think I need to take it in the region of about -40. If you have a look at this and see the difference, It's not a major drop in blacks, and I would probably pull the shadows down a little bit as well, so that we're just darkening down the darker areas of the image. I haven't really made any difference to the brighter parts of the image. And that should give us a bit of an adjustment. So if I turn off the simulation of paper and ink, you'll see that I've actually darkened the whole image down quite a bit. That's without the adjustment, that's with the adjustment. And to get this to really to suit your method of printing and your taste, you would need to do a little bit of experimentation and make a few test prints. But basically somewhere in the region of -40 or so for the blacks, and a little bit of a drop in the shadow areas as well will give you enough boost to those blacks to help that loss of crispness in the blacks on the matte paper. And the second thing we need to do is we need to increase the saturation a little bit, and here I would go somewhere around 10 to 15% increase in saturation, just to counteract a little bit of that loss of saturation. This particular image is largely blues and greens with a little bit of other color in it, but just giving that a little bit of a boost in those areas will help the image. Now, unfortunately, in Lightroom, we're a little bit restricted in how we can make these adjustments, and we just have to do a little bit of experimentation. But if we then go back to, we leave that soft proofing off, let's just pop back and look at the original image. You'll see that then we've just made a bit of a drop to the dark tones. The brightest parts of the image haven't really changed. It's really, if you look at the histogram, you'll see here that on the original and then on the proof copy, we've just squashed the blacks down a little bit more. And that would be then really enough for us to go ahead and print, but we would print using the proof copy, not the original version of this image. So that's how it works in Lightroom. And again, need to do a little bit of experimentation, but these are ballpark adjustments that should get you pretty close. And remember again that our soft proofing is only an approximation. It's not as good as the real print, and you would need to do a test print to see exactly how it works. So let's now have a look and see how it would work in Photoshop. So now moving on to Photoshop, let's have a look at how we would do this in Photoshop. And I've got the same image open in Photoshop. Now, to do our soft proofing, it's a little bit more convoluted than working in Lightroom, but to do that we would go to our View menu, Proof Setup, and Custom, and this is where we get to choose the profile for the paper that we're wanting to print on. And here, this gives me access to every single profile that's installed on my computer, and you can see that there's several hundreds of them, and it can be a little bit of a challenge to go and find the right profile. Now, here's the profile we used in Lightroom, Rag Photographic, and we look at the option here, the rendering intent. We would leave it relative colorimetric, but what we want to do is simulate the paper color, and automatically it selects simulate black ink, and then we just merely turn on the preview on and off, and we get much the same preview as we would in Lightroom. We see that the blacks are now a bit washed out and the whole thing is a bit flat. So how do we counteract that in Photoshop? Well, let's turn that off, cancel out of that. And how I would do this is using two different adjustments. Now, I've already previously tried this out, so I'm going to delete those. So with our image available, first thing we do is we made a curves adjustment, and let's just have a look at this. This is a little bit counterintuitive, but what we do with the curves adjustment is we exclude all but the darker tones in the image. Now, on your display of the histogram in your curves adjustment, if you don't see these little dividers at 10% increments, you can hold down the Alt key and click on the body of this curves adjustment. You'll see now it changes to quarters. Click on it again, goes to 10%. I use the smaller divisions because I normally go and pull this white point across to about the 30% mark, or the third line in, sometimes a little bit further. And you'll see now that most of the image is looking pretty horrible, but we're not finished yet. The next thing we do is we just grab another point on this line and just create a soft drop off with this curve to where it hits that flat line. And it looks even worse, but not to worry. The next thing we do is we go down to the adjustment itself, and what we do is we use the blend mode to make this work for us. And what we do is we use the multiply blend mode, and all we've done is we've isolated the darkest tones in the image and then used the multiply blend mode to darken them. And let's have a look at that. If I turn that on and off, you'll see I'm getting very similar effect to what happens in Lightroom, but I've got a little bit more control here over exactly what range of tones I want. Now, if I wanted to include a few more of those medium level tones, I could just move this point a little bit further across and just adjust this to suit. And again, it requires a little bit of experimentation to get the right setting, but this will get you right in the ballpark. And the second thing we would need to do is quite simply just to increase the saturation in the image, and we'll go to a hue saturation adjustment, and somewhere between 10 to 15%, let's go to 12, and we're just adding a little bit of color. It's probably not even visible on the YouTube video, but it's just adding a little bit of subtle increase in saturation. If I go up a long way, you'll see that it gets pretty crazy, but somewhere around 10 to 15 will give you an adjustment that will just boost those colors sufficiently to get the right result. So let's now go back in and look at that soft proofing. And unfortunately, every time you go into this custom soft proofing, you've got to now go and reselect the profile because it doesn't remember what you last used. And so we come back in here and simulate the paper color, and we can then preview it. Now the preview still looks fairly terrible, but the actual print will be much closer to what you originally intended, bearing in mind that this soft proofing is not really giving you an accurate result. Now the other thing that we can do from Lightroom, from Photoshop, is we can use our print preview to give us a soft proofing. So if we were to go to the print menu, we've got our printer, and let's choose that same paper profile that we wanted to use, and it was the rag photographic. Let's not worry too much about the sizing of the image, but you'll see here if I tick this little box that says match print colors, you're pretty much getting the same result as you would using the soft proofing method. By going into the print preview, it gives you a pretty good idea of how that will work. Let's just quit back out of that. And so this is the way that will get you much closer to a good result with your printing on matte paper. And the same goes for other images. Let's just take this one for example. It doesn't have quite as many dark tones in it, but let's have a look at how that soft proofing would work. So let's go back to View, Proof Setup, Custom, choose our smooth fine art paper and rag photographic, simulate the paper color and preview, and you'll see here the difference is not as dramatic. Obviously the bottom part of the image is a bit flatter, but in these brighter areas there's not a lot of difference. So if we were to use the same technique on this image, curves adjustment, bring the white point back to around the 30% mark, round about there, roll that line off into a smooth drop off, and then go to multiply blend mode. You'll see now that it's really only affected those really bottom areas. I think I probably want a little bit more of those mid-tones included, so now I'm going to just adjust that a little bit more, and then I can see now that all of these tones here have darkened quite a bit. This may not be quite enough, but this will get us a lot closer, and you'll see that the brighter parts of the image have not been affected. So doing it this way, and then of course adding our saturation increase. This is already a fairly saturated image, and that will just give that a little bit of a boost. So the technique for printing on matte finish papers is not rocket science. It's fairly simple. What we do is we crush those blacks and we add a little bit more saturation to counteract the softening effect of the paper surface. But of course we still need to do our output sharpening, which we'll cover in another video. But for now, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.